Well, now what I'd like to do is read you 5 statements, because these statements to me are very, very important to your understanding of how to use your will, what's the best way to use your will. My pain and the pain of others is caused by my choices, and it will reduce if I use my will to reduce it, or if I use my will to make different choices. So this is a benefit of using your will in a loving way. My pain and the pain of others will reduce. Now, you know what the big problem is on the planet today? The majority of us are not concerned about other people's pain. You see it all the time, right? It's like, if a war happens, as long as it happens somewhere else, everything's fine. Isn't it true? That's how most of us feel. As long as it happens somewhere else. We can be actually causing the war through our choices, right? And at the same time still feel it's fine that it's happening to somebody else. We can. Right? Just a simple cause of that, for example, as an example. When you go shopping, most of the time you want to get cheap prices, right? Because you've got worries about money and other things like that, right? So you choose the cheapest thing. But the cheapest thing, quite often, is damaging a lot of people. But do we care? Not really. We just choose the cheapest thing. So we're not even making a choice based on what we really want. We're making a choice on what's the cheapest. And having the cheapest frequently causes a lot of damage to other people on this planet. We're not willing to pay what something is actually worth and how long it actually took to make and so forth. We're only willing to pay a certain amount, and as a result, we engage that particular product, and that particular product might be involved in all sorts of unloving processes overseas, or even in our own country, and we don't care, because we need to make ends meet financially, and that's our motivation. So our motivation isn't love, it's selfishness. Can you see? That's our motivation. This happens frequently, doesn't it? How many times we go down, we don't even know where things come from half the time. Do we? We just choose the cheapest. Whatever the cheapest is the best result for us, is what we feel. That's an example. Thanks.
This may sound as an excuse, but in fact we don't know if the other products that have a higher price suffer from the same problem.
We don't know, because there's no open disclosure of the companies as to who manufactured it, where they were, what happened, how much cost was involved in manufacture and so forth, how much profit they have, because nobody's willing to put all of their financial details on the internet. And then I go, well, how many of you have done that? And I've already asked that question and none of you had. So that's an indication that you've got the same problem as they have. You don't want to openly disclose what you're truly doing with your money and your finances and how much you get in and how much you go out. You don't want to be transparent about it. You don't want to be. So how can you expect the world around you to be? You can't. How can you expect them to do something that you can't do? You are not making informed choices because you're not told the truth, but you don't want to tell others the truth so that they can make informed choices. We've got to change that, right? But this is what we do. We don't consider the others. Glenn, thanks. Just down here. Thanks, Renee.
Just the mere fact with war, we don't speak up and say anything.
Even if we speak up, most of the time we're being hypocritical. Because the reality is a lot of our choices are causing the war in the first place. And our fear that's inside of us that we refuse to release, and the desire that we have for safety and security that we refuse to release from within our soul, is actually causing these particular problems. And we have no desire to address that emotionally. So even if we did speak up, a lot of the times we're just going to be a hypocrite doing it.
Yeah.
Right? And this is our problem. Stop being a hypocrite. Start changing the inner stuff that's going on that causes these particular things. Start changing the choices we make that cause those things. And now speaking up has some validity.
Yeah.
We're no longer being hypocrites.
Well, what would some of the choices that we could change with war?
Well, what are a lot of the wars caused by? You think about it. most war is caused by someone else not having what I want, or, sorry, wanting what I have, or somebody else not having what I have and therefore them wanting it. Most wars caused by that. If there was an equitable distribution of the world's resources, then there'd be less chance for war, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do I do with my money? I save it up, don't spend it, don't do things with it, I put it in the bank because I'm afraid of security and other issues. What's that doing?
Withholding the money from, say, someone who needs it.
Yeah, withholding, sharing the wealth. Now, what if those people don't want to work for it? Well, then I can't share it, because the principle is if a person doesn't want to work and take responsibility for their own life, then they shouldn't be given things automatically. Yeah. So we want to make sure that we give it in such a way that where people have to do something with it, rather than just give it as a gift, that where the person, learns that they can be dependent. We don't want that. But there's ways to do that in a loving way, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's also issues like I want certain things, like I've just pointed out. I want my fuel price to be less than a few bucks. It doesn't matter to us what the overall cost of that is to the earth or to the earth's resources or to other countries or any of those kind of things. Yeah. If we examine another issue, most of the world's wars are partly caused by the fact that we make arms to have war. Right? And in fact, 1/3 of the economies of all of the Western nations are driven by manufacture of products for war. So would I be willing to forgo 1/3 of everything I have in order to stop war? Now, if you ask the average person that, as long as the war isn't happening in their own location, they wouldn't be willing to forgo 1/3 of what they have. It's like government. Imagine the government come up with a proposition right now and said, look, we're going to take 1/3 of everything you've got right now away from you. Now, the average person would just have a fit about that, There'd be all cries of communism and socialism and, there'd be cries of like, how dare they? I've worked so hard for these things. And it would go on for centuries, wouldn't it, probably, given our nature. By the time all of this generation had died, there'd still be an outcry about it. And yet that's what we need to do. We need to, all of our Western nations in the end, we need to give away 1/3 of our wealth. Yep.
Thank you.
So, that's why Mary and myself share 90% of what we receive with other people. We don't need what we actually receive. Yeah. But we do need it if we want to help other people. Does that make sense? So we do. We share it with other people. Yeah. So the average person wouldn't share 90% of what they receive, would they? You'd be lucky if back in the Bible days, it was 10%, of what you received. Yeah. And even that was a fairly good idea, really, if you think about it. If we all shared 10% of what we received with other people, then the world would already be quite a good place, wouldn't it? I doubt whether there'd be so many starving people. I doubt whether there'd be 50 million children dying every year of malnutrition in the world. So there's a number of things that have to change. Our heart has to change, our motivations have to change, our desire to see what our choices have on the effects of our choices on other people has to change. A lot of things have to change. But none of those things will change unless we become more loving, and we can't become more loving unless we receive God's definition of love. We can't receive God's definition of love unless we're open to receiving it. So this is why I'm teaching you what I'm teaching you right now. Does that make sense? Because once you receive God's definition of love, your desire to do things changes. Like many of you will work out, this is a good thing we could do. This is another good thing we can do. We could do this great thing too. We could have training programs here and educational programs there, and we could do this and we can do that. And we can do it no matter whether we get everyone around us agrees or not, because we no longer care about whether you agree or not. We just care about whether it's the good thing or not. But we care too much about what everybody thinks, and we care too much about our money, and we care too much about our comfort, and we care too much about all of these things, and so we're not willing to do all of these different things. Isn't that true? All right, let's look at the suffering. My suffering and the suffering of others caused by my choices will reduce if I use my will to love. So isn't that reassuring? Like, we can actually reduce suffering on the planet, but only if I use my will to love. I can be a force for helping people. Now, again, most people only consider that they're suffering. They only consider their own suffering. They don't consider the suffering of others. Right? My pleasure and the pleasure of others caused by my choices will increase if I use my will in harmony with love. But again, most people don't care about the pleasure of others. They only care about their own pleasure. Right? My happiness and the happiness of others caused by my choices will increase. But again, most people only consider their own happiness and not the happiness of others. Right? And obviously, my relationship with God is completely dependent on me using my will in a loving way. Completely dependent. So you won't have a relationship with God unless you use your will in a loving way. Right?